Welcome to a full house here at the Graduate Center and to all those who are participating online. My name is John Mollenkopf, and it's my good fortune to teach here at the Graduate Center and to direct our Center for Urban Research. The Graduate Center is the hub for CUNY's doctoral programs with 49 Ph.D. and MA programs and 29 research centers and institutes here at the Graduate Center. We do research and generate knowledge for the public good. Many of our faculty and students explore issues that are central challenges for New York City. This program is hosted by our Office of Sponsored Programs, the Center for Urban Research, and our interdisciplinary conversation on migration and belonging. We do a lot of really good work in our Center for Urban Research, and perhaps many of you have seen our election atlas. If not, if you go to Election Atlas NYC on the web, and you'll be taken right to it, and you can see exactly what happened in this election and previous elections in your election district. We're truly fortunate to have such a great panel with us today. These are some of the smartest people on the issues facing our city, and all have been effective in addressing them in different ways. They have strong and clear ideas that they will share with us. I'll briefly introduce each one of them, and then I will ask each one an initial question to start the conversation. And after everyone speaks to their initial questions, then we'll have a conversation around some additional issues. And I'll go alphabetically, and hopefully Nantasha Williams, who's in the W category, will forgive me for doing that. Our first panelist is Sayu Bhojwani. She was the first charter-affirmed commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs in the Bloomberg administration, after having earlier in her career led South Asian Youth Action and growing up in Belize. She received her Ph.D. from Columbia Teachers College for a dissertation examining South Asian political mobilization in New York City. Subsequently, she created an extremely successful nonprofit organization, New American Leaders, to promote and train political candidates from immigrant backgrounds around the country, which she documented in a fine book, People Like Us, which was prophetic of our current moment here in New York City. We're fortunate to say that Sayu will be teaching in our International Migration MA program next semester. John Liu is state senator from the 16th Senate District in Flushing, Queens. His constituents are also part of the new homeowning middle class of New York City, including many Chinese and Korean voters. He was the first Asian candidate elected to citywide office, and in my view at least, is perhaps the strongest and most effective campaigner that the city has ever seen, perhaps up until our current mayor. And he recruited strong Black voter support for his controller campaign, so he built cross-racial coalitions that are perhaps unusual in New York City. He's also taught public management in the CUNY system as well as for some of our sister universities. Hank Sheinkopf, to the left there, is one of the most durable and effective campaign communications experts in New York City. In addition to earning his doctorate at the Graduate Center with a dissertation on the transformation of the powerhouse of the Catholic Archdiocese in New York City politics, he is a rabbi, and in more ways than one. He cares deeply about the blue-collar white communities that have been so important to the city, the kinds of people who became much more visible to us all after the 9/11 attacks. Though he is fully attuned to the impulses that led to the election of Donald Trump, he continues to work to keep the Democratic Party true to its roots. Finally, and certainly not least, Nantasha Williams, council member from District 27 in Southeast Queens, representing Cambria Heights, Hollis, Jamaica, St. Albans, Queens Village, Adderley Park, Springfield Gardens. Her constituents are middle-class homeowners. Nantasha recently completed a Ph.D. in our social work doctoral program, writing about women leaders in the fight for civil rights and women's rights, and she herself has been a key organizer in those movements. So let's begin with Sayu. Let me ask you a twofold question. How do you think the strong South Asian support for Zohran Mamdani will influence what he does as mayor, and more broadly, What does his success mean for immigrant origin candidates in the many diverse immigrant receiving constituencies where these candidates are running for office across the country?
Thank you, John. Thank you for that question and for having me. And thank you all for being here. It's nice to see that people are still coming out in person. So I want to start first by saying that South Asian voters in the South Asian community are part of the New York community. So the issues that our mayor-elect talked about, no-cost childcare, fast and free buses, freezing the rent, are all issues that are going to matter and that do matter to South Asian voters. So, I'll talk about what makes this community different and what makes this moment different for us, but I do want to underline that we are just like every other New Yorker and concerned about affordability. I also want to say that identity is not a strategy. So there's a lot that has been made about the mayor-elect being immigrant and South Asian and Muslim American, which is all great, but he would not have been able to run a successful and historic campaign based on identity alone. The fact that he showed up as an authentic candidate, that he connected with voters, that he expanded the electorate, and that he built a campaign based on small dollar donors were all part of his success. And I say that because, there are 19,000 hot takes that are being published right now, and everybody wants to understand how to replicate a campaign like this. And you can replicate the campaign, you just can't replicate the candidate. I think in terms of South Asians in particular, this is a moment for us to see a fighter who is willing to embrace all these aspects of his identity rather than run away from them. That would have been a very, maybe not easy, but acceptable strategy for him to use. I think that a lot of his success in the community has to do with embracing those aspects of his identity. And so, I want to make this distinction between, we often make this distinction in political science, right, about what is symbolic versus what is substantive. And in this moment, I find that that is a kind of blurred distinction, because one could argue that much of what he's doing is symbolic. But in this particular political moment, I think, although it may not have substantive policy impact, the campaign itself had really substantive impact on people who felt very much seen and heard. What is going to happen in terms of policy? I think, there are a couple of ways that I can imagine that this administration can continue to engage immigrant voters. What we don't want to see happen is what I call an Obama moment, where we get lost in the hype and the symbolism of this campaign, and that our communities do not hold the mayor-elect accountable to the promises and to the needs that the community has. There are going to be amazing parties, and we're all going to want to be at those parties. But the key is to build on the organizing infrastructure that this campaign developed, and that is going to be up to the groups that had developed that infrastructure prior to this campaign, that had worked on that infrastructure after September 11th, during the pandemic, during the 2021 elections, and then during the protests around Palestine. All of those activities helped to strengthen the infrastructure that groups like Drumbeats and the Committee Against Anti-Asian Violence and other groups had developed, led to his election. And so now all those groups have this responsibility to maintain that organizing infrastructure and to hold the mayor accountable on issues. And I'll just close by saying again that those issues are going to be the very same issues that matter to all New Yorkers.
I don't know what to say about all this, John. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. I did predict that he would win. I said it in January publicly. I've been wrong a lot. I've been right a lot, unfortunately. I've worked all over the world, so this election is very reminiscent to me as of the 1969 mayor election, which most of you in the room might not have been alive for. But there are two things that were very important: a significant demographic shift, an extraordinary amount of money spent. Actually, three things. And three candidates on the ballot of consequence. So in '69, effectively the independent was a fellow named John Lindsay, who was the mayor. who ran as a Liberal Party candidate. The Liberal Party in those years had tremendous cachet. It was important. It was made up of Jews and others. There were a lot of Italians and others who were in the needle trades. And they were very significant. The Cuomo's tried to destroy the Liberal Party one year, and the Teamsters Union, which I worked for, was among my clients, sent me in to finish them off, and I did. And then I met Andrew Cuomo again in 2002 and finished them off. I learned a couple of things about him in both those events, okay? That arrogance is not a way to conduct a political campaign, or at least not let it be seen, okay? But to the Lindsay issue. So Lindsay loses the primary, becomes a Liberal Party candidate in the fall. Mario Procaccino, a judge who became the city controller, as Honorable Lou was at one point in his career, ran as a Democrat. And then you had John Markey, who was a Republican state senator from Staten Island, who was the Republican candidate. So what does it matter? Turnouts were very high. Lots of money was spent, some of it known and some of it not known, which I think is the case for all people who ran in this particular race. And there was an ethnic shift involved. There was an exodus of white blue-collar people and Jews and others, and an influx at the time of people from Puerto Rico. I don't like that word Latino. I find it very disturbing because it's not fair to the people who come from different countries. But a tremendous influx of Puerto Ricans and African Americans who were part of that great migration from the South. And then melting pot shifted. And Procaccino was singing an old song about neighborhoods and about particular racial attitudes. John Lindsay portrayed himself as a man of great foibles who somehow did some things correctly. You may have heard this one before, right? You just heard it in this past election. And but who coined the phrase done by a late media consultant named David Garth, calling New York's mayoralty the second toughest job in America. And then you had John Markey, who essentially was there to ensure that the conservatives remained in place. And you kind of had that before. So the argument that I'm trying to make to you is that the cycles of New York politics may look different, but in fact, they're very much the same. It's an in-migration and out-migration of people seeking the same kind of New York dream, some of whom are successful, some of whom are not. Racial groups often are polarized in other parts of the electorate. Violence is always something that occurs underneath. And I can tell you, having worked in polls in those years, in that year, it's the first campaign I ever worked on.
Hank, if I could jump in here, you were among those who were most opposed to Mamdani's candidacy and thinking about running an opposition organization.
Sure, I did successfully. In fact, the neighborhoods that I worked in voted against him.
The question I have for you is there anything you could see him doing that would lead to some degree of reconciliation with the white blue-collar constituencies that you have been associated with,
I'm a union
cops,
guy.
the construction workers, et cetera?
I'm an actual union guy. I mean, I came out of the unions. I was a policeman, which we can say, right? I came out of public sector unions. I've worked for my first client after I left my previous line of work was the Local 237 Teamsters, which represents, among others, the public safety officers in this building. So my biases have to do with people who put calluses on their hands, not people who talk about it. And I have tremendous respect for the new immigrants and the work that they are doing in the communities they're building. And anybody with a brain who didn't understand that Queens would vote very differently than people thought it would, that Brooklyn is an entirely different place than it was 10 years ago, really doesn't understand the city. But I don't respect people who don't understand the experiences of the people that I come from, which are people who have very little. I mean, my mother was 15, my father was 19. I was on the streets at, I guess, 15 or 16.
but
So my experience is not that much different than many others who went before. So I wonder what that generation of people who haven't had those experiences and who just don't understand what it means to go without a meal are going to do for me and for the people I come from.
Well, let me just ask, Mamdani's victory speech talked about working for, people with hands who's, were wrinkled from work.
Sure.
It was a classic restatement of exactly what you are talking about, and yet you think, so the question really is, are you irreconcilably opposed? Do you think the constituencies that you've worked for are irreconcilably opposed, or is there a way to overcome the differences? And if there is, what is that?
It's very hard. I mean, I think about the Deep South. I mean, I worked for many years for the Alabama Education Association, and I did campaigns throughout Alabama, and I worked all over the Deep South. And I never thought it was possible to reconcile the powerless with the powerful. That once people ascend to power, something happens to them, they lose a chip. They become less concerned about the people they're supposed to represent and the ideas they voice rather than maintaining the power of that office. The reality of this mayor's positioning, and something John Liu said inside, is that the out-year numbers are always awful, but this is much more awful than previous years in many ways. And ultimately, he's going to have to come back to the unions to make this work. And it's not because they're going to say, oh, we like you because of the mayor, but anybody who's read the history of 1975 understands that when doing business with the powerful, who are the unions in this town, the mayor has much less to say about it. Just a fact of life.
So I'd like to shift to Senator Liu now. And when he was running for controller and I was watching reports of his campaigning, it seemed like you began at about 4 a.m. and ended about 2 a.m. the next day in terms of visiting everywhere, in terms of churches all across the city and in every community, and that you did manage to receive votes from lots of different and previously unaligned with each other constituencies. And yet in this election, the folks in your district probably voted pretty heavily against Zohran Mamdani and in favor of his opponents. And I wonder what you think about how he could maybe echo some of the things that you had done previously and reach out to the people who were living in your district who weren't convinced that he should be the mayor.
I'm not sure that the margins were that dramatic. You know, he won large parts of my area in Northeast Queens in the primary. And in the general election, there was a campaign of fear. And so I think that was to me the greatest distinction between the campaigns, a campaign of hope and optimism versus a campaign of fear and terror. And I think, to build on what Sayu mentioned before, Zohran is a historic candidate, but he never ran to make history. It's not a strategy. He ran on a message that he firmly believes in, and that message is based on his beliefs that were crafted by talking to a lot of real people in the streets, in the subways, in the neighborhoods, and he was able to just identify with people. So he had a great message, he had a great delivery, using modern techniques, which I think we all would like to get a better handle on. He's very effective, and I think it's going to come through because he won an outright majority. People didn't think that he was going to do that, but he did win outright. There was no one can say the vote was split by anybody. He won an outright majority. And the parts of the city that were not with him in the general election, I believe they're going to come around because Zohran Mamdani has led and in some ways spawned a movement. And that kind of movement allows a leader to make changes much more than anybody else who simply wins an election. So he's got a mandate, and I think he's going to use that effectively. He is, people say he's the first South Asian mayor of New York City. He's the first Asian mayor of New York City. And people recognize that, and it's historic. And, people want to see substance more than the identity politics. But the identity politics does still carry some weight in New York City. And when you start to open doors for people that never had doors open for them, it starts to make an impact. You're going to see a great deal of support for his policies, which, of course, will mean not only the support from other city officials, but state and federal officials as well. And when the people want to see something changed, all of those elected officials at different levels of government will follow suit because it's not about what Mamdani wants. It's about what people want. And I think Zohran has clearly articulated. there were reports that he even won Trump over. That Trump is somehow, Trump in his own way uses derogatory comments to show his fondness. When the president calls you, oh yeah, my favorite little communist. Well, I guess in some way that's endearing, right?
That's like an Asian parent compliment.
Exactly.
Thank you. Nantasha, your constituents and black voters across the city were less supportive of Mamdani in the primary than other groups, and they rallied enough in support of him in the general election to put him over the goal line of getting 50%. But it wasn't as full-throated support as they might have given to Kamala Harris or Biden or other Democrats. So there's still a kind of question lurking there. And I wonder what your constituents are telling you, what kind of conversations you're having with them about how to make a better connection.
Yes, and good evening, everybody. I think I live my life at this intersection because I do represent a district that is largely moderate conservative leaning, depending on where you go. But I consider myself to the left of my district a bit, and so always sort of trying to figure out how to find the connection between progress and maintaining the things that matter most. And I think Black voters are just very loyal people. And I always joke that my district is very incestuous. We only like our cousins. And so even running for office, you get a full, third-degree interview about who's your grandmother and what church you go to. And so when I've talked to a lot of my constituents about why they didn't support Zohran, it was like, I don't know him. Like, just very simple as that. Like, not about anything he's saying. They're just like, I don't know him. Where did he come from? And for many people who, I also have majority of the people that vote in my district are older. And so you have people who knew his father, right? The old little church lady's like, I knew his dad. That matters to people. And so I think it was a situation of voting with what you know, and kind of sticking to that and not sort of pivoting. But in the general, there were some elected officials that, are very credible. Senator Connery is a person that's a very credible person in the Southeast Queens community, and he endorsed Zohran and was very supportive and very anti-Cuomo. And so I think community members seeing other elected officials support him, people actually saying, well, he is the Democratic nominee is why he got more votes. One thing I wanted to add about what Hank was saying is that the demographics of my district are also different. And so, the Black population has decreased over the last couple of decades. Actually, I always shout out the growing South Asian demographic in my district. That's pretty sizable. And so it would be interesting to really go down to the electoral districts to see the different types of neighborhoods that might have voted in higher numbers for Zohran, because I'd argue that it's probably in those pockets where there has been somewhat of a migration of different types of demographics into the community.
Like David Dinkins and Bill de Blasio before him, Zohran Mamdani will come into office with lots of antagonistic forces ready to pounce on him, not least the New York Post. And so the question is, what kind of narrative might he develop to at least insulate his administration to some degree from those attacks, given that his campaign was tightly focused on issues of affordability, and he managed to keep those front and center, and to some extent that insulated him from some of the other issues that people were concerned about. So I don't think he's going to have more than about maybe a 1 week grace period after entering office. So if you were communications advisors, what would you tell the administration they should get prepared to do?
I want to maybe not answer that question directly, but I think that we just don't have as much control over narrative as we did before social media. So there's what comes out of his mouth, and then there's a narrative that gets shaped around that. And they ran a really tight campaign around messaging, but I think that what's been fascinating about this campaign is the role of kind of micro influencers. And I think, speaking to Natasha's point about her district, there used to be a time where like power was, like voter power was associational, I guess, like the union, whatever entity you were connected to. But now that is a very diffuse power. And so anybody with a phone has access to both broadcast and create content and messaging. And so I just would offer that, I mean, if that has to be framed as advice, like, he can only control what he does and says. He cannot control what people say about what he does and says, including the average voter, the average teenager, never mind the New York Post. And then the question of how many people are, I think so I'll just end on this, like, this is a reality that we are looking at a slice of information that is tailored to the previous slice of information that we looked at, right? Like, what my news feed is filled with versus what Hank's news feed is filled with is really tailored to what we did yesterday or which conversation we had. And so I think to assume that there is, and I think he's already shown that he's gonna say what he needs to say, and people are gonna do what they need to do with that, which is not probably fun for the press office, but it is what it is.
I don't think there's a way for him to insulate himself. This is a part of why people say being a mayor in New York City is the second toughest job. It's just a very critical press corps. So it doesn't really matter what he says or what he does. He's just going to have to deal with a ton of criticism, which is not anything he hasn't dealt with throughout this entire campaign season. I will say something that they're already doing, they're really good at messaging. Like, they need to teach classes on like message discipline, and he is like a master at message discipline, and it's so important because he never sort of, no matter what you ask him, he never really moves off of that message. And I feel like if he just continues to do that, that'll probably be helpful. But the other thing that was mentioned briefly is how he will leverage the outside game of politics. And I just read an article today. They created a nonprofit to sort of support the campaign agenda. And so to me, a part of how you insulate yourself is build an army of people around you. And there was an army of people, so they always talk about the thousands of volunteers that they had. So he built an army around him. And to the very eloquent point that the senator made, it's sort of not even about him anymore. Certain people you look and say, well, why did this person endorse Zohran? They're completely against what he stands for. Well, because the people in the community are supporting that message. And so I think that is a powerful way that they already are doing and looking towards in the future in terms of like insulating his agenda, or insulating him and his agenda that he wants to push.
Hank?
It was a brilliant campaign. We're mindful of 1969. Don't be fooled. Everything was tested for psychological purposes down to the stickers, which had the graphics of Superman. Everything old is new again in that the street mattered as much as everything else that occurred. The volunteer effort was extraordinary. I predicted they'd have 40,000 on the street in the primary. They did. I would guess that the number in the general election was close to 100,000. This is a national movement, and if it fails, it won't fail nationally, which has it portends extraordinary changes in the entire country as we know it, and likely the death of the Democratic Party as we know it, which I've said publicly, and I probably will write something about. But the most extraordinary thing is that he will get away with this because he has an extraordinarily popular base. He can't do what he wants because he doesn't have the financial wherewithal to do it. He will bully, which mayors have done before. There's nothing new about this, by the way. Ed Koch was as bad about it as anybody else. He will bully the legislature. He will try to bully the city council. And it'll work for a while. And then if he doesn't deliver come August or September, we can't blame Eric Adams anymore, like every other administration that's come before. And then there'll be kind of the political warfare that's very unique to New York. What will the outcome be? It's not clear because we live in very different times. But Robert Redford, he was in the candidate. And it is very important to note that everything old is new again.
John, what would your advice be?
I like that line. Everything old is new again. I want to congratulate Hank. He remembers what happened in 1969. How many of you were alive in 1969?
I read books, John. It's
All right.
important. I read a lot of books.
Were you and I were alive in 1969 too, right, John? I mean, I don't know if you remember.
I was too, yeah.
Same.
I was reading the newspapers early in the morning, but
Books are good to read, John. They'll help you.
I think, we have message discipline. He certainly is a master at that. He has the ability he has the infrastructure to get the message out. But I still have kind of like a benign, maybe naive view of the fourth estate. I don't think they're trying to get you all the time. I think you have to do your work in whatever office you desire and are actually able to acquire. And if you do your job right, they're not gonna nitpick at you here and there. But when people read the New York Post, so what? They don't believe everything they read either. It's my firm belief that people are not stupid. They have an idea what's happening. And thankfully, in New York City, unlike nationally, where I'm very disturbed that Donald Trump is almost co-opting all the big media now, particularly the corporate media, at least here in New York City, we have a fair amount of independent media, nonprofit media. We've got great schools such as this. We've got lots of local media. And so people are not entirely dependent on big corporate media. And to some extent, the independent media serves as a check on some of the big corporate media too. So I think we get our information, and you can't shape all your information. Information is gonna get out. At the end of the day, it's what you do. And Zohran knows that he's gotta deliver results. And so far, it's been a week. He's put together what I consider a pretty credible transition team. And his first two appointments, somebody who is an old hand at city and state government, as well as his trusted aide. I think that's a great combination, and we're going to see appointments for schools chancellor, for police commissioner, some of the top-level agencies coming in short order. His first order of business is establishing credibility, that he can run the city, no matter what the lofty goals or dreams might be, that he can run the city. I think he's going to do that on day one when he gets sworn in on January 1st. I don't think, notwithstanding what he said in the past, I don't think he's going to arrest any particular prime ministers if they show up in New York City on January 1st. But he's gonna put his head down and get to work as mayor of New York City, a place that requires requires vision, but it also requires hands-on management.
I was impressed that he reached out to a lot of people who were opposed to him, who were critics. Kathy Wild introduced him to a lot of different movers and shakers in the city that he probably never talked to before. I heard him talk about reading Dan Doctorow's autobiography and saying that the Bloomberg administration had run a very effective administration and that he wanted to run one also. My former friend, Bill de Blasio, when he was had his inauguration into office, I think very stupidly and disrespectedly mistreated Mayor Bloomberg sitting there right on the platform. That was a really dumb move on his part, I think. And Zohran is doing the opposite. He's going to people that opposed him and saying, let me hear what you think. I'm here to learn and to listen. That's not something that one often sees in movement candidates who've just won a big victory. So if he continues along that vein, I think he's made, it's a good sign anyway. You mentioned, we were talking earlier about the out-year budget situation for the city and the state. At the moment, in this last budget cycle, we were in pretty good shape. They're forecast the usual out-year deficits, but we have much more looming over that in terms of when the one big bill cuts kick in after the 26 congressional elections. And I've heard state forecasts for very large numbers of the deficit in out years, and yet the Mamdani administration would like to raise and spend more money, and that seems like a looming challenge, if not a conflict. So I wonder what people's thoughts are about negotiating that. As a member of our state legislature and a leader, maybe you could give us some insight about what would happen.
Well, as I mentioned to all of you in the green room, I've been looking at these budgets for, I hate to say it, over 25 years now, and there has not been a single year where there have not been huge deficits in the out years, meaning next year, the year after that, and the year after that. It's always been the case. Maybe Hank is right that it hasn't been as large as it is today, but it has been just as large in some years, not every one of the 25 years. Right after the Great Recession, you should have seen those numbers. During COVID, forget about it. So these are not record-breaking out-year deficits that we have seen, although they are certainly on the large side. On the other hand, we're already getting reports that state tax revenues are ahead, significantly ahead of what was projected, even just a few months ago. And I haven't seen the city numbers yet, but there is a certain economic resilience to what we're looking at. And there's no question, when my colleagues and I we've been talking about this for months now, even though we don't actually get back to meeting until January in the state capitol. Our first order of business is trying to help people stay healthy, because we have, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who will no longer have health insurance in short order. We're not going to let them go sick, because not only will it be bad for them and their families, it'll be bad for the rest of us.
Yeah, but there goes the CUNY budget into the healthcare
Well,
system.
you know what? Actually, we have Zohran had another idea for the CUNY budget, which we can get into. But the numbers are what they are. We're gonna work through them. It may be difficult for some of Zohran's more costly proposals to get enacted right away, but they don't all have to be completed on day one. And there's not been a mayor that I recall that has not come into office and immediately spent a lot of money. I mean, that's just the way it works, because you have to make your mark. And I think the new mayor is going to have some wins in this new session, especially when there's certainly a give and take between him and the governor. The governor now has her reelection coming up, so I think there's going to be enough for everyone to claim a win.
Nantasha, from the city council point of view, what do you think is the budget dance/struggle?
Yeah, I'm a member of BNT, so it's the budget and negotiating team that, it's a group of members that get selected by the speaker. And, this BNT, I mentioned, is it a possibility to put additional money aside in the rainy day funds? And a lot of the feedback that I got was, well, right now the projection says everything's okay, and so why would we tuck money away if right now the projection is okay? So for me, I'm personally concerned about it, because it's all just a trickle down effect. What happens at the state then impacts the city, and the large amounts of people who will be uninsured, those numbers are going to be much greater in New York City, because the state is about downstate, upstate sometimes. And so I'm particularly concerned. I'm concerned about our hospitals, because it's not just about an individual's health, it's also about how these public institutions get funded. And hospitals have already been in a lot of issues over the last couple of years. So, I mean, I think it's just something that is going to be a very difficult conversation next session around how to save money, where to cut, where to invest. I actually happen to agree with a lot of Zohran's progressive tax policies, but that requires state action, and the state really hasn't wanted to touch anything around taxes. And so, you know, we have to figure out how to raise money and have to figure out how to spend the money that we're raising in ways that impact the community, and being cognizant that we are dealing with other issues. So you might have a bright universal childcare. It's a great idea, but if you have a current emergency, you have to shift the priority based off of the current need. So I think we're gonna see a lot of that. If you wanna do this, well, we have this particular issue. What can we do here and not do this year? Maybe we can do something next year.
Hank, 60+% of what government spends money on is personal services. You've represented a lot of city employees over the years. How do you foresee that relationship unfolding? De Blasio, among other things, did settle the contracts early that a lot of them were open when he came into office, and that was seen to be one of his progressive steps. But how do you foresee that unrolling?
It's not clear yet, and I think it would be unfair to say it is clear. We do know that de Blasio spent the Bloomberg surplus. You know, Bloomberg's management style was entirely different. We know the city went into severe problems in the first part of the Adams administration because of that. I think the unions are going to have a lot more to say about this than people want to admit right now, because the contracts start going up next year. Negotiations are going to happen. We are down significant numbers of police officers. We're going to be close to under 5,000 detectives in New York City. We had 7,200 at top. I represent, in the interest of disclosure, New York City detectives, and have represented every police union coalition. It's a serious problem. This is number one target for terrorists, and not having sufficient detectives to offset that threat is a very, very serious phenomenon. So the question is, what is the mayor, this upcoming mayor, who's I think that universal child care is critical to the city's future. Somehow compensating for the disaster that this president has heaped upon us all in the great big, one big beautiful bill, which is crap. It's extraordinary to me. How do we deal with that in a state that has had a history, and a city, a history of being benevolent towards all, is the problem that this mayor is going to face. And it's not an easy one. And the question is, who's going to take the tap? Who's going to take the hit? All politics, as John Mollenkopf taught me in urban settings, is about competition between groups for resources, okay? Who is going to get the tap? Because trust me, someone is going to get the tap. They're going to get that hit. We don't know who it is yet. And the fight between groups, that tension, will escalate when we get close to those decisions.
Sayu, your thoughts?
I mean, one thing I'll say is that in my sort of short memory of the previous mayors, most mayors we remember for doing one signature thing. So there was 311, there's universal pre-K, I don't know what we remember about the Adams administration. Sorry? City of Yes. So we want Zohran, and believe that Zohran will do a lot more than just that one initiative. But to put it all in perspective, like usually there is one signature initiative that continues and that people remember. I think what's going to be really interesting, and Hank, you might know this, or John, you might know the answer, is I don't know in my sort of history with New York City, don't know of a time when a mayor has created or merged a new department. So this Department of Community Safety, like how that's going to shape up and what that's going to mean for budgets is unclear to me. But as optimistic as I am about this administration, I remind myself that there's usually just one signature initiative. Even with presidents, there's like this one thing. Sometimes it's as big as the New Deal or the Affordable Health Care Act, but it's usually just one big thing. And so he's going to decide what that's going to be.
Well, if I could follow up on that, it seems to me that of all the potentially costly things that he would like to do, the one that might have the biggest impact on young people in New York forming families, balancing work-family tensions, trying to make their careers, thinking about, can they afford to have a child in New York City versus moving somewhere else, that the child care issue is really one that we've neglected as a country, and how would you see really fully addressing that? There are a lot of fairly well-paid families. Let's say you have two young professional careers and each person is making, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but $125,000, that's $250,000 a year, but they might be paying $50,000 or $60,000 a year for childcare at this point. So it's stressing not just poor families, but up and down the income. So, and yet doing it must be very costly, and it doesn't make sense necessarily to fully fund a family that's making $250,000 a year. So how does that get worked out? How does that get implemented?
He has a plan for that, on how to raise the revenue to do it. And I just wanted to add that the council passed a whole bunch of bills to have universal child care a few years ago. Mayor Adams just never implemented it. So I think that there are pathways, and I know the council is for sure looking forward to working with Mayor Mamdani specifically on this, because we have so many members and, women majority. We've had like 4 or 5 babies born since we've been in the council. So childcare is something that comes up all the time, and the council already passed legislation to do this. It just was never implemented.
I think childcare has already been on the agenda in Albany and around the country. It is a big social shift in terms of families depending more on childcare, particularly government-funded and government-provided childcare. We've already got several $billions in the state budget, and that's only going to continue to increase. So I don't know that we're going to get to universal childcare immediately, but I do believe that it is a goal that can be achieved. We do need to put our heads and hats on, but it can be achieved, and it will clearly need additional revenues, which we're at a moment in time where there are some people in this state who got a huge tax break from the federal government. This president says, well, states should take care of themselves. So by that vein, I think we can enact a tax increase on those people who just got a huge tax cut from the federal government and provide several $billions more to take care of people in New York. Childcare and healthcare being among the top priorities.
If I could just add really quickly that I know people talk a lot about the financial implications of universal childcare, but something that we have talked a lot about in the council that doesn't always get talked about broadly is not really the money or the will, it's the government infrastructure, it's the bureaucracy. So if you look at what it takes to even open up a childcare facility, what it takes to get reimbursed for your services within that childcare facility, the system itself doesn't have the capacity to even do something like this. So that is the real challenge. I don't think the money is the real challenge. I think it's making sure that the city infrastructure is built up enough to have the capacity to do that. I mean, down to people having to get different clearances. There's only like 1-2 people. It's like the capacity to actually do it is more of the problem from my vantage point than the money.
I totally agree with that. You have to have the infrastructure, you have to have the will, and I think there is the will. We just have to figure out the infrastructure. We do have to pay for it, but on the one hand, making it universal is much more cost effective than trying to figure out exactly who's eligible, having families run through all this documentation and then trying to divvy up what's available. So universal does ease the process. It makes things more cost effective. We have universal access to public schools. We should have universal access to childcare. And the other thing is that Nantasha is absolutely right. It's not just the fiscal impact of providing childcare. There's also the economic impact. And people sometimes forget that there would be a huge economic boon if we had universal childcare. Because part of what's holding our economy back right now is we don't have enough labor. We don't even have enough school teachers. We don't have enough police officers. We don't have enough supermarket workers. And a large part of the reason is because people don't have a way to feel secure that their child is being taken care of. If we're able to offer that and provide that universal child care, I think we had many, many more participants come back to the labor market, help propel our economic boom even further, and of course, drive tax revenues.
Sayu, we've been friends long enough that I've been able to watch your child grow up and get a sense of how you see this issue quite personally, and I wonder what your thoughts are.
The thing that we talk about is, as a couple, is the fact that like childcare is costly to us, but is still the person who's providing the childcare, if you're getting childcare at home, is still not really able to, even when we're paying a living wage, it's not a thriving wage. And so I feel like the overall benefit to the quality of life in the city shifts when you prioritize childcare, because you're prioritizing women, you're prioritizing immigrant women who are often providing that childcare. And so I see it as a broader quality of life issue and as a feminist issue, because the people who tend to step out of the workforce when childcare becomes too costly or too challenging are women, and the people providing that childcare are women. So I think, and we know that Zohran was raised by a feminist mother who was a working mother. So I feel like, taking this on as a feminist cause is an important highlight. It's not just a thing. I mean, it's part of the reason it hasn't been fixed, because men are just able to have it sort of sorted out somehow or the other, And so we need to move past this kind of Band-Aid approach to caring for our children and our families, and for prioritizing the ability of women to live in a way that is, that doesn't require this much emotional and physical and mental labor.
Yes, I applaud that too. So the first question from the audience, you won't be surprised, is something that's very dear to our heart here in CUNY, and it's addressed to Senator Liu. What is the viability of the New Deal for CUNY under the Mamdani City Hall?
I've supported the New Deal, so has Zohran. In fact, we both have a proposal that would fix a certain part of the New York City property tax code so that literally hundreds of millions of dollars of additional revenue could be dedicated to enhancing the CUNY's finances. Most of the New Deal is not so much a city responsibility. CUNY, the four-year colleges, are largely paid for by the state budget, and so it is a matter of fixing the state budget to reverse literally decades of disinvestment in CUNY. We have started doing that already. Toby Stavitsky is the chair of the Higher Education Committee, on which I serve, and we have significantly increased over the last 3 budget years the resources for CUNY, both operational and capital, because CUNY certainly needs capital as well. Where are we going to get to free tuition tomorrow? I don't think tomorrow, maybe the day after. Maybe the year after. But the point is that we are investing much more in CUNY than has been prior to about 3 years ago. And I expect that we're going to continue to do that. It's not going to be instantly overnight, but it continues to be significantly more every single year. So it'll be kind of a slow New Deal for CUNY. But there will be a New Deal for CUNY nonetheless.
Nantasha, do you want to just talk about how the city council thinks about CUNY?
Yeah, I feel like the same. I feel like we're always putting money into CUNY wherever we can for special initiatives, for existing initiatives, and so I don't see how that will change. We also have put in a ton of money over the last couple of years. The speaker always talks about her time as a CUNY student. And so, yeah, I think we'll continue to support CUNY where we can.
So the next question is, can you tell us the real deal with why Brad Lander was not appointed?
Y'all are real messy here.
Loose lips sink ships.
It is a bad thing to accuse a black man of a sexual misconduct when he was nowhere near it. If you do such things, there is a punishment to be paid. Alluding in public that Eric Adams was somehow involved with Epstein was absolutely despicable, and the man got exactly what he deserved.
Any other thoughts? I have a thought. If my advice had been asked, I would say, go find a job in the nonprofit or private sector to run something that would teach you something really new, because if you go into City Hall, you're just going to get into a personality fight with the mayor over who runs what. And so I wasn't surprised that that did not happen. Okay.
But just in defense of Brad, because we're in the same club, I think he has a very good shot at Congress. I think he has a very good shot at
Sorry, I
Congress.
didn't hear you.
Brad Lander has a very good shot at Congress.
Will the current mayor have any last-minute impacts on the incoming administration?
He's trying to. I mean, with the appointments to the Rent Guidelines Board, which will make it much more difficult for the new mayor to put his mark on rent increases. And of course, the invitation for January 1st. I don't think that helps the situation. But I think it's just going to be, it'll be a short-term impact. I don't think it's going to have a very profound impact long-term into the new administration.
And with that, we conclude the evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to the panel for being here.
Moderator.